Has your therapist ever been the exact source of your trauma? I was telling my therapist about the nightmare I had when she said, "That's exactly how you described it to Marcello." I sat up straighter on her couch. What do you mean, how I described it to Marcello? I'd never told her about that. Dr. Huffman froze and her face flushed as she tried to recover. I meant, that's how people typically describe such dreams to their partners. But I never told Marcello about the nightmares. We broke up before it started. The silence stretched between us. Marcello and I had ended things 6 months ago, badly. He'd cheated, I'd found out, and our last conversation involved me throwing his things off my balcony. The nightmares started after the breakup. Dr. Huffman, is Marcello one of your patients? She straightened her blazer, a tell I recognized. You know I can't discuss other patients. But you just did. You just told me he described the same nightmare. I misspoke. I meant, no. I stood up. You said, that's exactly how you described it to Marcello. Which means you've been telling him about our sessions. Her composure cracked. She set down her notepad, looking genuinely distressed. Angela, please sit down and let me explain. Explain what? That you've been violating doctor-patient confidentiality? She rubbed her temples. Marcello started seeing me 3 months ago. I didn't know he was your ex at first. You only ever called him Jay in our sessions. By the time I realized the connection, I was already treating both of you. You should have referred one of us to someone else. I should have, but I thought I could help both of you heal. Separately. She walked to her desk and pulled out 2 files. But then I started noticing patterns. You were both having the same nightmares. Both describing the same events completely differently. So you what? Started sharing information? She opened Marcello's file and pulled out notes. According to Marcello, you never threw his things off the balcony. He says you disappeared for 3 days, and when you came back, you didn't remember the breakup. He says he's been trying to reach you for 6 months. That's insane. He's lying. That's what I thought, until I realized you both had evidence for your versions. She showed me printouts. Screenshots from Marcello's phone showing conversations with me that I'd never had. Plans for trips after our breakup. Love notes sent from my number after I'd blocked him. These are faked. The phone company verified these came from your number. My head spun. Then someone cloned my phone. Dr. Huffman pulled out another document. 3 weeks ago, you told me about running into Marcello at the coffee shop. How he pretended not to know you. He did. Marcello came to his session that same day. He said you approached him, had a full conversation about getting back together, then acted like you'd never spoken when he called that night. That never happened. I know, because I was at that coffee shop. I saw the whole thing. You were watching us? I needed to understand. And what I saw was you both there at the same time, walking right past each other. No interaction. But both of you came to your sessions describing elaborate conversations that never happened. So we're both crazy? No. You're both completely lucid. Except when it comes to each other. It's like you're living in parallel realities. She opened her drawer and pulled out a USB drive. I started recording sessions. Both of yours. I know that's unethical, but I needed proof. She played an audio file. My voice describing the nightmare. Then Marcello's voice, describing the identical dream, but in his version, I was the shadow figure chasing him. Every dream you've had, he's had too. But you're each other's monsters. This is insane. Last week, Marcello didn't come to his session. When I checked my records, I couldn't find his intake form. The front desk has no record of him as a patient. But I have recordings. I have his file. I remember every session. She pulled out a photograph. The 3 of us in her office, smiling. I had no memory of it being taken. When was this? According to the timestamp, last Tuesday. During what you remember as a solo session. I stared at the photo. We looked like we'd achieved some breakthrough together. But I'd never been in the same room with Marcello since the breakup. I'm referring you to someone else, Doctor. Huffman said. This has gone too far. But Angela, I don't think either of you is lying. I think you're both telling the truth. And that's what terrifies me. I left clutching the photo I didn't remember taking. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcello. Great session today. Dr. W really helped us work through things. Can't wait to see you tonight. I blocked his number. Again. For the 6th time. But when I got home, there was a note on my kitchen counter in my own handwriting. Pick up Marcello at 8. Don't forget, we're telling Mom about the engagement tomorrow. I stared at the spinning ceiling fan, having no idea what the hell just happened. I grabbed my phone and ran back through everything that just happened. Sitting in my car outside Dr. Huffman's office with my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it twice. The photo on my screen showed all 3 of us smiling in her office, and I checked my calendar app once, then twice, then a 3rd time because I needed to be absolutely sure. Tuesday at 2 p.m., solo session. Just like every week for the past 8 months. No mention of Marcello anywhere in my schedule. I opened my notes app and started typing everything I could remember about what was real and what might have been planted in my head. Because if I didn't write it down right now, I might start doubting my own memory. My fingers moved fast across the screen, documenting every detail of the breakup, the balcony incident, the 6 months of zero contact. I hit save and backed it up to 3 different cloud services before pulling out of the parking lot. On the drive home, I made it maybe 2 miles before I had to pull over into a gas station parking lot. The text from Marcello about Dr. W kept flashing in my mind, so I opened my message history and scrolled back through months of conversations. The text existed right there in my phone with his name attached, talking about our session today and seeing me tonight. But I had zero memory of typing anything about an engagement or telling my mom. My stomach felt sick as I took screenshots of everything, the whole conversation thread, then checked the actual words again to make sure they matched what I remembered seeing. I pulled back onto the road and drove another mile before I had to stop again, this time in a grocery store lot, because I needed to screenshot my blocked contacts list showing Marcello's number blocked 6 different times over the past few months. Every piece of evidence went into a new folder on my phone labeled Evidence Do Not Delete, with the date and timestamp. Inside my apartment 15 minutes later, I walked straight to the kitchen counter and found the handwritten note exactly where Dr. Huffman said it would be. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables because the handwriting was definitely mine, the same slanted letters, and the way I crossed my T's, but I had absolutely no memory of writing those words about picking up Marcello at 8 p.m. or telling my mom about an engagement. I picked up the note with shaking hands and held it under the kitchen light, looking for any sign that someone else had written it or forged my handwriting. But no, this was my pen pressure, my spacing, my everything. I set the note down and checked every window lock in the apartment, testing each one twice to make sure nobody had broken in. Then I examined every door frame for scratch marks or signs of forced entry, running my fingers along the wood and checking the deadbolt for tampering. Nothing looked disturbed. The windows were locked from the inside. No broken glass, no picked locks, no evidence that anyone had been in here except me. I spent the next 2 hours going through every single account I had and changing the passwords. Phone passcode became a random string of numbers I'd never used before. Apple ID got a completely new password with special characters and capitals. Email accounts, banking apps, social media, streaming services, everything got a unique password that I wrote down in a physical notebook I kept in my locked desk drawer. Each new password went onto its own line with the account name and the date I changed it. My hand cramped from writing, but I kept going because taking control of my accounts made me feel slightly less like I was losing my mind. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything that offered it, even the accounts I barely used. By the time I finished, my notebook had 3 full pages of passwords, and my fingers hurt from typing, but at least I knew that starting right now, only I could access my digital life. The timeline document took another hour to create. I opened a new file and started typing out every detail of my breakup with Marcello 6 months ago, starting with finding the messages from the other woman on his phone, and ending with me throwing his stuff off my balcony while he yelled up from the parking lot. Every fight we'd had in the weeks before, every lie he'd told, every time I'd blocked his number and he'd tried to contact me from different phones. The nightmares started 3 weeks after the breakup, always the same dark hallways and shadow figures chasing me. I documented which friends I'd told about the breakup, which family members knew, who could verify my version of events. Seeing it all written out in black and white, with dates and times and specific details, helped me trust my own memory against whatever Dr. Huffman had claimed about parallel realities. This was my truth, documented and saved in multiple locations so nobody could make me doubt it. At midnight, I was still awake and staring at my laptop screen. I drafted an email to Dr. Huffman requesting copies of all my session records and any photographs taken in her office. I kept the tone professional but firm, asking for everything within 3 business days, as was my right under privacy laws. The email included a specific list of what I wanted, formatted with bullet points so nothing could be misunderstood or overlooked. Session notes from every appointment, audio recordings if any existed, video recordings if any existed, the photo showing the 3 of us together, any correspondence between her and other providers about my case. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute while I reread the email 5 times, making sure the wording was clear and couldn't be twisted. Then I hit send and watched the message disappear from my outbox into the sent folder. I grabbed my phone and texted Sarah, my college roommate who I still talk to every few days. Quick question. Have I mentioned Marcello recently in our conversations? Like in the past few months? I didn't explain why I was asking because I needed an unbiased answer, not one where she tried to make me feel better or tell me what I wanted to hear. My phone buzzed within minutes. No, you haven't brought him up since like February when you said you were glad to be done with him. Why, did something happen? Her response matched my memory perfectly, confirming that I hadn't been secretly talking about Marcello or acting like we were still together. I typed back, nothing, just checking something for therapy, and left it at that. Having her independent confirmation made me feel slightly less crazy. Sleep didn't come that night as I lay in bed replaying every single nightmare I'd described to Dr. Huffman over the past 6 months. The dark hallways, the shadow figures, the feeling of being chased by something I couldn't see clearly. I started wondering if she had somehow planted those images in my head through the way she asked questions, making me dream things that felt real, but were actually just suggestions she'd put there. The thought that my own mind might not be trustworthy scared me more than anything else that had happened today. I got up 3 times to check that the doors were locked and the windows were secure. Around 3 a.m., I turned on every light in the apartment because the darkness felt too much like those nightmare hallways. I sat on the couch with my laptop and started researching therapeutic suggestion and false memory implantation, reading article after article about how therapists could accidentally or deliberately influence their patients' recollections and dreams. First thing in the morning, I called my phone carrier before I even made coffee. I requested complete message logs for the past 6 months plus any SIM card change history. The representative on the phone seemed confused by my urgency, asking twice if I was sure I needed all of that. Yes, I need everything. Full logs of every text sent and received, timestamps, and any record of SIM card swaps or suspicious login attempts. She put me on hold for a few minutes, then came back and agreed to email the records within 48 hours. I also asked them to note any unusual login attempts on my account and flag my account for extra security monitoring. She said she'd add a note to my file and recommended I change my account PIN, which I did right there on the phone using a new random number sequence. Next, I pulled up my email and wrote to my building management requesting door access logs and hallway camera footage for the past month. I explained I was investigating a potential security breach in my apartment and needed to verify who had entered my unit and when. The property manager responded within an hour saying she'd compile the information and have it ready by tomorrow afternoon. I asked specifically for the footage from the hallway outside my door and the main entrance log showing when my key fob was used to access the building. She confirmed they kept 30 days of footage and access logs and everything would be pulled together in a single file for me to review. Having concrete evidence coming from multiple sources made me feel like I was finally taking control of this situation, instead of just reacting to whatever Dr. Huffman had told me. Dr. Huffman's email arrived around 3 that afternoon while I was still sitting at my laptop going through my message history. The subject line read, "Re-Session Records Request," and I opened it immediately, my hands shaking slightly as I clicked. She wrote that she completely understood my concerns and agreed the slip during our session was inappropriate and unprofessional. She said she would begin the process of transferring all my records to a new provider of my choosing and would have everything compiled within the week. She apologized again for any confusion or distress the situation had caused me. Reading through her response, I felt my suspicion growing instead of settling. Her quick agreement to everything I'd asked for seemed too easy, like she was trying to make this go away fast before I dug any deeper. I scrolled down to the signature block at the bottom of the email and stopped cold. She'd signed it Dr. W in a flowing script font, but every single previous email from her over the past 6 months had been signed Dr. Huffman in plain text. I pulled up my sent folder and checked 3 old emails just to confirm I wasn't misremembering. Sure enough, everyone showed Dr. Huffman at the bottom. I grabbed my phone and opened the text message about picking up Marcello that I'd found on my counter. I scrolled to the bottom and my stomach dropped. "See you at 8. Dr. W in that same flowing script. 2 completely different sources using the exact same unusual signature. I screenshot both the email signature and the text signature and put them side by side on my laptop screen. The font looked identical. The spacing was the same. Even the little flourish on the W matched perfectly. This wasn't coincidence. This was someone using the same signature across different communication methods, which meant either Dr. Huffman had sent that text, or someone was deliberately copying her signature style. I spent the next hour searching through every email she'd ever sent me, looking for any other instance of Dr. W and found nothing. Just Dr. Huffman over and over in plain Arial font. Whatever made her switch to this signature happened recently, right around the time everything started getting weird with the parallel memories and the photo I didn't remember taking. That evening, I pulled out the external hard drive I used for photo backups and plugged it into my laptop. I opened my phone settings and started the full device backup, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. While that ran, I went into my iPad settings and disabled iMessage completely, then did the same thing on my MacBook. If someone had access to my Apple ID and was using it to send messages from other devices, I wanted to cut off as many access points as possible. Each device I locked down made me feel slightly more in control, like I was building a wall between my real life and whatever digital manipulation was happening. The phone backup took almost 2 hours because I had thousands of photos and messages, so I made dinner and ate it standing at the counter, watching the percentage tick up slowly. When it finally finished, I unplugged the hard drive and put it in my locked desk drawer next to the notebook with all my new passwords. Having a complete copy of everything on my phone felt important, like insurance against someone changing or deleting things remotely. I grabbed my iPad and went through the process of changing its passcode too, using a completely different number sequence than my phone. Then I enabled 2-factor authentication on every app that offered it, going through my banking apps, social media, email, everything. My fingers were tired from typing in verification codes by the time I finished, but knowing I'd added extra security layers to every account made the effort worth it. Before bed, I opened the voice memo app on my phone and hit record. I started talking through everything I remembered about my relationship with Marcello, beginning with how we met at a work conference 3 years ago. I described our first date, how he'd taken me to this Italian place downtown, and we'd stayed until closing time just talking. I talked about the good parts, the trips we'd taken together, the way he'd surprised me on my birthday with tickets to see my favorite band. Then I moved into the harder stuff, describing the night I found the messages on his phone from someone named Rebecca. I detailed throwing his clothes off my third-floor balcony, watching his shirts and pants flutter down into the parking lot below, while he stood in my doorway begging me to listen. I described blocking his number, blocking him on every social media platform, telling our mutual friends that we were done, and I didn't want to hear his name again. I talked about the nightmares starting about 2 weeks after the breakup, always the same dark hallways and shadow figures chasing me. I recorded for almost 20 minutes, including every specific detail I could remember, every conversation, every fight, every moment that proved my version of events was real. When I finished, I saved the file as reality check and backed it up to 3 different cloud services. If my memories started changing or someone tried to convince me things happened differently, I'd have this recording in my own voice describing exactly what I knew to be true. 2 days later, I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with an email from my carrier. The subject line read, "Account Security Review Results," and I opened it immediately, nearly dropping my phone in the process. The email confirmed that their security team had detected an unauthorized login attempt on my account from an IP address in a different state approximately 2 months ago. The attempt had been blocked by their two-factor authentication system, but someone had definitely tried to access my account using my username and password. They'd added extra monitoring to my account and recommended I change my password again, which I did right there in my kitchen before I even finished reading the email. My hands shook as I typed in a new random string of letters and numbers. Knowing someone had actually tried to get into my account, that I wasn't imagining the digital interference, made my skin crawl. But at the same time, having concrete proof from the phone company that something real had happened gave me validation. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone had actively tried to compromise my account, and the only reason they failed was because I'd set up two-factor authentication months ago on a whim after reading some article about phone security. I pulled up my browser and searched for digital forensic specialists in my area. My friend who works in tech had mentioned someone named Jordan Casey, who'd helped her company investigate a data breach last year. I found Jordan's website and filled out the contact form, explaining that I needed help analyzing my devices for unauthorized access and message spoofing. Within an hour, Jordan's assistant called back and scheduled me for a consultation the next morning at 9. She told me to bring my phone, laptop, any tablets, and all backup drives I had. She also said to write down a timeline of when I first noticed weird things happening with my accounts. I spent the rest of the afternoon creating that timeline in a Word document, listing every strange text, every photo I didn't remember taking, every instance of my accounts behaving in ways I didn't control. Seeing it all written out chronologically showed a clear pattern starting about 3 months ago, right around when Dr. Huffman said Marcello had started seeing her for therapy. The timing couldn't be coincidence. That afternoon, I made myself sit down and listen to the audio recording Dr. Huffman had shared with me of my own therapy session. I'd been avoiding it because hearing my own voice describing the nightmares felt too vulnerable, too raw. But I needed to understand what she'd done, how she'd influenced my thoughts without me noticing. I put in my earbuds and hit play, and immediately I caught things I'd missed while sitting in her office. She'd ask a question like, "And when you're running through those dark hallways, do you feel like the walls are closing in?" Before I'd even mentioned walls. She'd suggest details about the shadow figure before I'd described it. Her voice had this subtle pushing quality, like she was leading me toward specific answers rather than letting me tell my own story. I listened to the whole 20-minute recording twice, taking notes each time about the moments where she'd planted suggestions. By the end, I felt sick. She hadn't just violated my confidentiality by treating both me and Marcello. She'd actively shaped my nightmares through the way she asked questions, making me dream things that felt real, but were actually just seeds she'd planted in my head during therapy. She'd also attached a redacted transcript of Marcello describing his version of the same nightmare to her follow-up email. I opened the PDF and started reading, my chest getting tighter with each paragraph. He described running through dark hallways just like in my dreams, but in his version, I was the shadow figure chasing him. He said my face would flicker in and out of the darkness, sometimes looking normal and sometimes twisted into something he didn't recognize. He described the same sense of being hunted, the same fear of what would happen if the shadow caught him. Reading his words describing me as the monster made my hands shake. We were having identical dreams, but casting each other as the threat. The parallel was too specific to be random. Either Dr. Huffman had deliberately planted the same nightmare imagery in both of us, or something else was happening that I didn't understand yet. The transcript was only 3 pages, but I read it 4 times, looking for any detail that didn't match my own dreams. Everything aligned perfectly, except for who was chasing versus being chased. I opened a new spreadsheet and started comparing what I actually remembered about my relationship with Marcello versus what appeared in Dr. Huffman's session notes. I'd requested copies of all my session summaries as part of my records request, and she'd sent them over in a massive PDF. I went through each session chronologically, pulling out any mention of Marcello or our relationship. In session 5, she had me saying I felt ambivalent about the breakup, but I'd never used that word. I'd been clear that I was done, that his cheating was unforgivable. In session 8, she wrote that I'd expressed interest in eventual reconciliation, which was completely false. I'd specifically said I never wanted to see him again. There were small inconsistencies throughout the notes, Moments where she'd editorialized my feelings or put words in my mouth that didn't match what I actually said. I created 2 columns in the spreadsheet, one for what I remember saying, and one for what Dr. Huffman wrote. By the time I finished going through all the notes, I had 17 instances where her documentation didn't match my actual memory. Either my memory was failing in very specific ways, or she'd been changing my words to fit whatever narrative she was building. The phone carrier's full SMS routing logs arrived in my inbox the next morning, a massive spreadsheet with thousands of rows. I downloaded it and started filtering for messages that appeared to come from my number. Most of them showed normal routing through my carrier's towers, exactly what you'd expect. But scattered throughout were entries that made my stomach drop. Several texts that appeared to be from my number were actually routed through a different origin point, some kind of third-party service I didn't recognize. I highlighted those entries in red and counted them. 12 messages over the past 3 months had been sent from my number, but hadn't actually come from my phone. Someone had spoofed my number to send messages I never wrote, probably to Marcello based on the timing. The routing logs didn't include message content for privacy reasons, but the technical data was enough. This was concrete proof that someone had been impersonating me digitally, sending texts that looked like they came from me, but were actually sent through some kind of spoofing service. I screenshot the highlighted entries and added them to my evidence folder, then forwarded the whole spreadsheet to Jordan Casey's office with a note about the suspicious routing patterns. Finally, I had technical proof that matched what Dr. Huffman had shown me, evidence that my digital life had been compromised in ways I couldn't have imagined 6 months ago. The building management email arrived the next morning with an attachment labeled Access Logs, Unit 4B. I downloaded it and opened the spreadsheet showing every door entry for the past 30 days. My keycard showed regular patterns, morning exits around 7:30, and evening returns between 6 and 8. I scrolled through looking for any entries during work hours or late at night when I was definitely not home. Nothing. Every single entry matched times when I was actually there, which meant nobody used a keycard to get into my apartment during the window when that handwritten note could have appeared. I checked the dates again, comparing them to my calendar. The note was on my counter the day I came home from Dr. Huffman's office, but the logs showed no unusual entries in the 3 days before that. Either I wrote it myself during some kind of blackout I don't remember, or someone planted it before the building installed the new logging system last month. Neither answer made me feel any better about the situation. I saved the file to my evidence folder and moved on to the next thing I needed to figure out. I closed my eyes and forced myself to replay the coffee shop encounter from 3 weeks ago. In my memory, I walked in around 2 in the afternoon and ordered my usual latte. Marcello was sitting at a corner table with his laptop open. I saw him immediately but kept my eyes forward, walked straight to the counter and didn't look his direction again. After getting my drink, I left through the side door without making eye contact. He did the same thing, never looked up from his screen, never acknowledged I was there. But Dr. Huffman described us having a full conversation about getting back together, said we stood by the sugar station talking for 5 minutes. I tried to force a different memory, tried to picture myself walking over to him, but it felt completely wrong. My memory was crystal clear on this one. We walked right past each other like strangers, exactly the way you do when you're trying to avoid your ex in a public place. The fact that she claimed to witness something totally different from what actually happened made my stomach hurt. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I opened my phone and pulled up Marcello's contact. I started typing a message proposing we meet somewhere neutral with someone else present to compare our versions of what happened. My fingers moved across the screen, putting together something that sounded reasonable and calm. Then I read it back and it sounded crazy, so I deleted the whole thing and started over. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The second version was shorter and more direct, just asking if he'd be willing to talk with lawyers or therapists present. I deleted that one too because it assumed he'd even respond, and I'd blocked his number 6 times already. On the third try, I wrote something in between, explaining I had evidence of digital manipulation and thought we should compare notes. I read it 5 times, made small edits, then saved it to my drafts folder instead of sending it. I wasn't ready to contact him directly yet, not until I had more proof about what was real and what was planted. The next morning, I drove across town to Jordan Casey's office in a converted warehouse building. She met me in the lobby, younger than I expected, maybe early 30s with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I handed over my phone, laptop, and 2 external hard drives containing all my backups. She took them carefully and led me to her workspace, which had multiple monitors and equipment I didn't recognize. She explained how she'd create exact copies of everything before analyzing them, something called forensic images that preserve the original state of the files. Just knowing someone with real technical skills was looking into this made me feel less alone in trying to figure out what happened. She asked me to write down my passwords on a piece of paper she'd keep locked in her safe, then told me the initial scan would take a few hours. I could come back tomorrow to go over what she found. Before I left, Jordan sat me down and explained in normal language how someone could mess with my accounts without me knowing. She drew simple diagrams showing how SIM swap attacks work, where someone convinces your phone company they're you and transfers your number to a new SIM card. Once they have your number, they can reset passwords and get into your accounts. She also explained how someone could steal my iCloud security codes if I logged in on a public Wi-Fi network without protection. She didn't talk down to me or act like I was being paranoid, just went step by step through what was technically possible. Understanding the actual mechanics of how digital manipulation works helped me separate what could be someone hacking my accounts versus what might be my own confusion or memory problems. I left her office feeling like I finally had someone on my team who could prove whether the technical stuff was real. Back home, I pulled up the text thread with the Dr. W message about picking up Marcello at 8. I read it slowly, paying attention to every word choice. Marcello always used complete sentences with proper punctuation, even in texts. He'd write, "I will be there at 8 o'clock," instead of, "I'll be there at 8. But this message had casual short forms like "can't wait" instead of "cannot wait," and instead of "your." The phrasing was also off. Marcello never called our therapy sessions sessions. He always said appointments, because he thought it sounded less clinical. These tiny details suggested someone else wrote the message while trying to sound like him, but didn't know his actual texting style. I took screenshots of other real texts from Marcello before we broke up, comparing the punctuation and word choices. The difference was obvious once I looked closely. Within minutes of finishing that comparison, Dr. Huffman sent another email. She wrote that she wanted to formally step back from treating me and would provide referrals to other therapists in the area. Her tone was apologetic and professional, saying she recognized the situation had become too complicated. I hit reply and typed out that I'd accept a referral only after receiving complete copies of my records, including any audio or video recordings she made during our sessions. I wanted documentation of everything before I let her off the hook for what she did. I made sure to mention the recordings specifically, since she'd admitted making them without my permission. I kept the email short and direct, then hit send before I could second-guess the wording. That evening, my phone rang with Jordan's number. She'd found something in the 3-person photo that Dr. Huffman showed me. The hidden file information showed it was taken on my phone, but the date it was supposedly added to my photo library didn't match the date the file was actually created. Someone either changed the hidden data to make an old photo look recent, or they transferred a photo from another device to my phone and made it appear like I took it. Either way, the technical evidence proved the photo wasn't what it seemed. Jordan explained this meant someone with access to my phone or cloud account had been moving files around and changing dates to create false evidence. I thanked her and asked her to put everything in a written report I could show to other people. The next day, I searched online for therapists who specialized in trauma and reality testing. I found Celia Ashworth's website listing her practice areas, which included helping people recover from gaslighting and manipulation. Her approach focused on teaching clients to trust their own experiences again, which seemed exactly what I needed after months of being told my memories were wrong. I filled out her online intake form, explaining in the notes section that I was dealing with therapeutic boundary violations and needed help sorting out what was real. She had an opening the following Tuesday at 4. I confirmed the appointment and added it to my calendar, feeling nervous about trusting another therapist, but knowing I couldn't process this alone anymore. 2 hours later, Jordan sent an email with a subject line that made my heart race. She'd found a secondary Apple ID login to my account that came from a co-working space downtown, not from any of my known devices. The login happened on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon when I was definitely at work in a meeting. Someone else was actively accessing my cloud storage and messages during times I had solid proof I was somewhere else. Jordan included the IP address, the exact timestamps, and the location data. This was concrete proof I wasn't imagining the digital interference. Someone had been in my accounts, reading my messages, looking at my photos, and probably downloading information to use against me. I forwarded the email to myself 3 times and saved copies in multiple places, terrified this evidence might somehow disappear like everything else that proved what was really happening. I printed out everything Jordan sent me and drove to the police station the next morning. The detective working the front desk looked bored when I explained I needed to file a report for identity theft and unauthorized account access. His expression changed when I laid out the carrier logs showing the co-working space IP address, the forensic analysis of spoofed messages, and the timeline of unauthorized logins during times I had proof I was somewhere else. He called over another detective who specialized in digital crimes, and they spent 20 minutes reviewing Jordan's documentation. They asked detailed questions about my relationship with Marcello Dr. Huffman's admission about treating us both, and the strange photo that appeared on my phone. By the time I left with an official case number, the skepticism had shifted to genuine concern about the sophistication of whoever was manipulating my accounts. Having that case number written on the receipt made everything feel solid and real instead of like paranoid thoughts I couldn't prove. The next morning, I sat across from Nigel Contreras in his law office downtown. He specialized in health privacy violations and therapeutic malpractice, which seemed like exactly what I needed. I handed him the email chain where Dr. Huffman admitted to recording sessions without my permission and treating both me and my ex at the same time. He read through everything silently, his face getting more serious with each page. When he got to the audio files Dr. Huffman had shared, he stopped and looked up at me. He asked permission to listen to one of the recordings, then played it on his computer speakers. Hearing my own voice describing nightmares while he took notes felt strange, but I needed him to understand the full scope of what happened. After reviewing everything, he leaned back in his chair and said this was one of the clearer cases of boundary violations he'd seen. The unauthorized recordings alone were a major ethical breach, but treating former partners simultaneously without proper disclosure made it worse. Nigel explained I had strong grounds for filing a formal complaint with the state licensing board. He walked me through what the process would look like, warning me that once we filed, it would trigger a discovery phase where Dr. Huffman's attorney would probably fight back. The licensing board would investigate, interview witnesses, and review all the documentation. It could take months and get messy, especially if Dr. Huffman tried to claim I was misremembering events or exaggerating the harm, but he thought the recordings were damning evidence that she knew she was violating ethical rules. I asked him what would happen to her license if the board found violations. He said outcomes ranged from mandatory supervision and additional training to suspension or revocation, depending on severity. I told him to move forward with the complaint. I needed accountability for what she did, not just her apologizing and referring me elsewhere. He started drafting the formal complaint document right there while I sat in his office. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with all of Dr. Huffman's session notes spread out in front of me. I went through them slowly, looking for patterns in how she documented my dreams and our conversations. About halfway through, I started noticing the same phrases appearing over and over. She would write things like patient reports, shadowy figure in hallway, or patient describes feeling of being watched, in almost identical language across multiple sessions. It felt less like she was recording what I actually said, and more like she was using a template to shape how I described things. I grabbed a highlighter and marked every repeated phrase. By the time I finished, there were highlighted sections on almost every page. The realization hit me that she might have been subtly suggesting imagery during our sessions, planting ideas that then showed up in my dreams. She would ask leading questions like, "Did the figure seem threatening?" before I even described what I saw. Reading it all at once, I could see how she guided my responses. The thought that she shaped my nightmares through careful suggestion made me feel violated in a completely different way than the boundary violations. She hadn't just broken confidentiality, she had messed with my head. I called Nigel and told him about the templated phrases in the session notes. He asked me to scan and send him copies with my highlighting. Then he drafted a formal letter to Dr. Huffman, requesting she immediately stop all treatment and transfer my complete records to his office. The letter was professional but firm, stating clearly that I considered our therapeutic relationship terminated due to her ethical violations. It listed the specific breaches, including unauthorized recording, dual treatment of former partners, and potential manipulation of session content. Nigel sent it via certified mail so we would have proof she received it. Putting everything in legal writing felt like I was finally reclaiming boundaries she had completely destroyed. No more back-and-forth emails where she tried to minimize what happened. This was official documentation that she violated her professional obligations to me. Jordan's full preliminary report arrived in my email 2 days later. She had found significant gaps in my message threads that didn't match up between what was stored on my actual phone and what appeared in my cloud backup. Someone had deleted entire conversations from the backup while leaving them on my device, or done the reverse. The inconsistencies were scattered across the past 6 months, always during periods when I supposedly had contact with Marcello that I didn't remember. Jordan included screenshots showing messages that existed in one location but not the other, with timestamps that proved the deletions happened remotely. She highlighted several instances where my cloud account was accessed from that co-working space IP address right before messages disappeared. This wasn't my memory failing or me forgetting things. Someone had actively manipulated my digital footprint to create gaps and confusion. The forensic evidence proved it beyond any doubt. Through Nigel, I drafted a letter to send to Marcello. It took me 3 tries to get the tone right because I kept swinging between angry accusations and overly formal legal language. The final version offered one supervised meeting to compare evidence if he agreed to have his own attorney present. I made it clear this wasn't about reconciliation or getting back together. I needed to know if he was experiencing the same digital manipulation, or if somehow he was involved in what was happening to me. The letter explained that Jordan's forensic analysis showed sophisticated technical interference in both our accounts. I proposed meeting at Nigel's office where everything would be recorded, and we would both have legal representation. Nigel reviewed it, made a few small changes, and sent it via certified mail. Having that buffer of attorneys between us felt necessary. I wasn't ready to trust Marcello directly, but I needed answers about whether we were both victims, or if he knew more than he was saying. Building management finally sent the hallway security footage I had requested weeks ago. I downloaded the file and watched it 3 times straight through. The timestamp covered the entire window when that handwritten note could have appeared on my kitchen counter. Nobody entered or exited my apartment during those hours. I checked every person who walked past my door, but none of them stopped or tried my lock. The footage was clear enough that I could see faces and read the time in the corner. Either I wrote that note myself during some kind of episode I don't remember, or it had been there longer than I thought and I just didn't notice it until that specific day. Neither explanation made me feel better. If I wrote it during a fugue state, That meant I was losing time and doing things I couldn't recall. If it was there for days and I didn't see it, that meant my perception was so off I was missing obvious things right in front of me. I spent hours that evening searching online for any therapist with the initials Dr. W near Dr. Huffman's practice. I tried different combinations of search terms and finally found Dr. Weaver Marsh, a couples therapist with an office just 2 blocks away. His website listed his specialties as relationship counseling and communication repair. My hands shook as I clicked through his staff photos and credentials. The Dr. W signature that appeared on that text about picking up Marcello suddenly made horrible sense. Marcello might have been seeing this other therapist, not Dr. Huffman at all. That would explain why Dr. Huffman's front desk had no record of him as a patient, even though she had his file and recordings. If someone impersonated me in couples therapy with Marcello at Dr. Marsh's office, that was a whole new level of manipulation I hadn't even considered. I took screenshots of Dr. Marsh's website and contact information, then immediately emailed everything to Nigel. Nigel responded within an hour saying he would send a records request to Dr. Marsh's office first thing in the morning. We needed to be careful about how we worded it since we were essentially asking if someone committed identity fraud by pretending to be me in therapy sessions. He drafted a letter explaining this was part of an active identity theft investigation with a police case number. The letter requested any files under my name or associated with Marcello's treatment, along with copies of intake forms and photo identification provided by the female patient. Nigel sent it via certified mail and also emailed it to Dr. Marsh's office manager. If someone had impersonated me in couples therapy with my ex-boyfriend, using my name and discussing our relationship while I had no idea it was happening, that crossed from digital manipulation into something far more disturbing. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone, wondering how many other parts of my life had been infiltrated by whoever was doing this. My phone rang 3 hours later while I was making dinner. Nigel's name flashed on the screen. I answered and he told me Dr. Marsh's office had called back within an hour of receiving his records request. The receptionist sounded worried when she confirmed that Dr. Marsh had been treating Marcello in couples therapy for the past 4 months with a woman who gave the first name Angela, but never showed photo ID. She explained their intake process usually required identification from both partners, but this woman had come to the first session claiming she forgot her wallet and Dr. Marsh let it slide since Marcello vouched for her. The receptionist promised to pull the complete file and send it over by end of business tomorrow. She also mentioned Dr. Marsh wanted to speak with me directly once he reviewed the situation, because he was extremely concerned about the ethical implications. I thanked Nigel and hung up, then immediately texted Jordan asking if she could cross-reference the co-working space IP address with Dr. Marsh's appointment schedule. She responded within minutes saying she was already on it and would have results by morning. Jordan called me at 7 the next morning before I'd finished my coffee. She'd spent half the night running comparisons between the unauthorized iCloud logins and the therapy appointment times from Dr. Marsh's schedule that Nigel forwarded her. Every single co-working space login happened during a window that lined up with one of Marcello's couples therapy sessions. Whoever was pretending to be me in Dr. Marsh's office was also accessing my cloud accounts at the same time, probably pulling details from my messages and photos to maintain the act with accurate information about my life. The coordination was too perfect to be random. Jordan explained that the person was likely sitting in the therapy session with Marcello, then stepping out to use the bathroom or take a call and logging into my accounts from a laptop or tablet to refresh their memory about recent events in my life. The technical setup required planning and skill, but nothing too advanced for someone with basic IT knowledge and access to my login credentials. Dr. Marsh's session notes arrived by secure email that afternoon. Nigel forwarded them to me with the woman's name blacked out per privacy protocols. I opened the PDF on my laptop and started reading, and within 2 paragraphs I felt sick. The Angela in these notes used phrases I would never say. She described our relationship history with Marcello in ways that didn't match reality. She talked about feeling abandoned when he worked late, but I never cared about his work schedule because I had my own demanding job. She mentioned jealousy over his female coworkers, which was ridiculous since I'd met most of them at company events and liked them. The imposter painted me as clingy and insecure, personality traits that didn't fit me at all. Reading through 8 sessions worth of notes, I saw a version of myself that was completely fabricated. This woman had studied me enough to use my name and basic life details, but she didn't actually know me. The disconnect between her performed version and my real personality was obvious now that I was reading it from the outside. She'd created a character based on stereotypes and assumptions, not on who I actually was as a person. Nigel called that evening with a proposal that made my stomach drop. He suggested arranging a limited recorded meeting with Marcello at his law office, where we could both present our evidence side by side. Everything would be documented, both our attorneys would be present, and we'd have clear boundaries about what topics were on the table. Nigel thought seeing Marcello's reaction to the forensic findings in real time would help us figure out if he was involved in the manipulation or if he'd been played too. I sat on my couch staring at the wall for a full minute after he explained the plan. The thought of being in the same room with Marcello after 6 months made my chest tight. But I also knew Nigel was right. If Marcello had his own evidence of being manipulated, we needed to see it and compare timelines. If he was somehow behind this whole thing, his reaction to Jordan's technical findings would probably give him away. I told Nigel I'd do it, but only with strict ground rules about no direct contact outside the meeting and everything recorded for my protection. The meeting happened 4 days later in Nigel's glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of his office building. Marcello arrived with his attorney, a sharp-looking woman in a gray suit who introduced herself and immediately laid out ground rules for professional conduct. I sat across the table from Marcello and barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there when we were together. Nigel placed my phone carrier logs, Jordan's forensic analysis, and Dr. Marsh's session notes in the center of the table. Marcello's attorney did the same with a thick folder of documents from their side. We spent the first 20 minutes just reviewing evidence without speaking directly to each other, everything filtered through our lawyers. The carrier logs showed messages neither of us had sent. The photo metadata revealed images appearing in both our libraries that we didn't remember taking. Dr. Marsh's notes described conversations and relationship dynamics that didn't match either of our memories of how things actually were between us. Marcello pushed his own stack of printed screenshots across the table. His hands shook slightly as his attorney explained what they were. Spoofed messages that appeared to come from my number, sent during times when I'd blocked him and had no contact. Missed call logs showing attempts to reach me that didn't appear in my actual phone records. Text conversations about meeting up that I had no memory of having. Some of the timestamps lined up exactly with those co-working space logins Jordan had found. Looking at his evidence, I felt something shift in my chest. He'd been getting fake messages from me at the same time someone was impersonating me in therapy and accessing my accounts. The manipulation had been running in both directions, making each of us think the other was reaching out or behaving in ways that never actually happened. I glanced up and met his eyes for the first time since the breakup. He looked as confused and scared as I felt. Neither of us spoke directly, but I could see in his face that he was putting together the same realization I was. Someone had been playing us against each other for months, using technical skills and identity theft to create a completely false narrative about our post-breakup relationship. Through our attorneys, we hammered out an agreement over the next hour. All future communication would go through legal channels only. No direct texts, calls, emails, or in-person meetings without lawyers present. Both of us needed protection from whoever had been manipulating our phones and impersonating us in various contexts. Marcello's attorney drafted the agreement on her laptop right there in the conference room, and we both signed it before leaving. The whole thing felt incredibly sad. 6 months ago, we'd been in a relationship, however flawed. Now we needed legal protection from each other because someone had weaponized our connection. Walking out of Nigel's office, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that Marcello seemed to be a victim too, not the mastermind behind this. Grief that our relationship had been so thoroughly poisoned that we couldn't even have a normal conversation anymore, without attorneys present. Nigel and Jordan coordinated the next day to get the police involved at a higher level. With both of us as confirmed victims and solid forensic evidence of identity theft and account compromise, the detective agreed to subpoena the co-working space for their complete access logs and security camera footage. The facility had been resisting Jordan's informal requests, but with an active criminal investigation and a court order, they had to cooperate. Finally, we were getting real institutional support to track down whoever had been running this operation. The detective explained it would take a few weeks to process the subpoena and review the footage, but at least the wheels were moving. I felt like I'd been fighting this alone for so long, and now there were professionals with actual authority taking it seriously. 2 days after our conference room meeting, Nigel got a call from Dr. Huffman's attorney. She was reaching out to acknowledge that Dr. Huffman had improperly recorded therapy sessions without patient consent and had treated both parties in a former romantic relationship without proper boundaries or referrals. Dr. Huffman was voluntarily entering a supervision agreement with the state licensing board and would not contest the ethics complaint Nigel had filed. Her attorney sent over a written statement admitting the violations and outlining the supervision plan. Reading it, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a flat acknowledgement that yes, this happened, and yes, it was wrong. The admission felt hollow because it didn't explain anything about the bigger picture. Dr. Huffman's boundary violations were real and serious, but they were just one piece of a much larger puzzle involving technical manipulation and identity theft that she probably had no part in. Jordan's interim forensic report arrived in my inbox that Friday evening. I opened it on my laptop and read through 20 pages of technical analysis that she'd broken down into language I could actually understand. The iCloud session from the co-working space had run automated scripts to resend old photos and text messages, making them appear in my library and message threads as if they were new. Someone with real technical knowledge had deliberately created false evidence of ongoing communication between me and Marcello. The scripts were set to run during specific time windows, probably coordinated with the therapy sessions to maintain consistency. Jordan noted that this level of planning required not just technical skills, but also detailed knowledge of both our schedules and access to our account credentials. The sophistication was almost impressive in how disturbing it was. This wasn't some random hacker or jealous ex with basic phone skills. This was someone who'd invested significant time and effort into creating an elaborate false reality for both of us. The next morning, Dr. Marsh's office sent over their complete lobby sign-in records for the past 4 months. I opened the PDF on my laptop and scrolled through pages of handwritten entries until I found the dates matching what should have been my couple's therapy sessions with Marcello. There it was in someone else's handwriting. The name Angie Parker signed next to Marcello's signature. My chest got tight reading that nickname because literally nobody has called me Angie since I was 12 years old and hated it. So much I made everyone switch to Angela. The imposter didn't know that detail, didn't know me well enough to get something that basic right. I forwarded the document to Nigel with a note explaining the nickname thing, feeling this weird mix of validation and creepiness that I finally had concrete proof I never stepped foot in Dr. Marsh's office. My first appointment with Celia Ashworth happened 3 days later in her office that smelled like lavender and had way more plants than Dr. Huffman's sterile space. She didn't immediately dive into my history or try to fix anything, just taught me this breathing technique where I pressed my feet flat on the floor and counted my exhales. When I told her about the confusion and not knowing what was real anymore, she didn't offer explanations or theories, just nodded and said it made complete sense that I'd feel unsteady after months of having my reality messed with. She had me practice noticing 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, grounding myself in the present moment instead of spiraling about what might or might not have happened. By the end of the session, my shoulders had dropped about 2 inches from where they'd been living up near my ears. Having a therapist who respected my confusion without trying to immediately resolve it felt like someone finally understood that I didn't need answers right away. I just needed to feel solid in my own body again. The police detective called me that Friday afternoon while I was grocery shopping. He explained that the co-working space finally provided their access logs, but the person who used that computer bought a prepaid day pass with cash at the front desk, so there was no credit card trail or ID verification. He was working on getting their security camera footage from that time period, but warned me that even if they got a clear image, it might not lead anywhere useful since the person clearly knew how to cover their tracks. I thanked him for the update and pushed my cart toward the checkout, feeling frustrated but not shocked that whoever did this had been careful about staying anonymous. The detective promised to keep me posted if the camera footage showed anything, but I could hear in his voice that he wasn't optimistic about identifying the person. That weekend, I sat at my kitchen table with Jordan's security recommendations printed out and worked through every single item on her list. First, I called the 3 credit bureaus and froze my credit, writing down all the PIN numbers in my physical notebook. Then I downloaded a password manager and spent 4 hours creating unique passwords for every single account I had, from banking to streaming services to that random forum I posted on once 3 years ago. Jordan had recommended hardware security keys for 2-factor authentication, so I ordered 2 of them online and set reminders to configure them when they arrived. Each protective layer I added made my chest feel slightly less tight, like I was building a wall around my digital life that would keep out anyone trying to break in. By Sunday evening, my eyes hurt from staring at screens, but I'd implemented every recommendation on Jordan's list. I took a photo of the completed checklist and texted it to her, and she responded with a thumbs up and the words, "Fortress mode activated." Monday morning, Nigel sent me a draft of the formal complaints he planned to file with the state licensing board. The documents laid out Dr. Huffman's dual treatment of former romantic partners, her unauthorized session recordings, and her failure to maintain proper therapeutic boundaries. I read through the legal language describing what she'd done, seeing my experience translated into official violations of professional ethics codes. Nigel explained the board would open an investigation and likely require Dr. Huffman to enter supervised practice while they monitored her compliance. It wasn't the dramatic justice I might have fantasized about, but it was real accountability through proper channels, ensuring she couldn't do this to other clients. I signed off on the complaints and Nigel filed them that afternoon. 2 days later, the board sent confirmation they'd opened an investigation and assigned a supervisor to monitor Dr. Huffman's practice going forward. Dr. Marsh sent a follow-up email the next week explaining he'd completely overhauled his intake procedures. Going forward, all partners in couples therapy would need to provide photo identification at the first session, and his staff would verify identities before any joint sessions began. He wrote that he felt genuinely disturbed his practice had been used to facilitate this impersonation, and he wanted to make sure it couldn't happen to future clients. Reading his email, I felt this unexpected appreciation that at least something good came from this nightmare. Other people would have better protections because of what happened to me, even if I never got answers about who did it or why. Jordan delivered her final forensic report 3 weeks after she started the investigation. The document was 30 pages of technical analysis, but she'd included an executive summary in plain language at the beginning. The spoofing techniques used on my accounts matched a pattern she'd seen in 4 other cases in the area over the past year. All of them involved sophisticated identity theft, targeting people's personal relationships, creating false evidence of communication that never happened. The police were now investigating whether this was part of a larger criminal operation, possibly someone selling these services to people who wanted to manipulate their exes or frame someone for harassment. Knowing I wasn't the only victim somehow made it feel less personal and more like I'd gotten caught in someone's criminal business. It didn't make me less angry, but it shifted how I understood what happened. This wasn't about me specifically. I just ended up in the crosshairs of someone running a technical con. After weeks of back and forth through lawyers, Nigel finally reached a resolution agreement with Dr. Huffman. She provided complete copies of all my session records, including transcripts of the unauthorized recordings she'd made. Her written apology acknowledged the boundary violations and detailed the supervision arrangement she'd entered with the licensing board. The agreement included a confidentiality clause preventing either of us from publicly discussing the settlement terms, but I had documentation of everything that happened. Nigel explained this was probably the best outcome I'd get without going through a full malpractice lawsuit, which could take years and cost money I didn't have. I signed the agreement knowing it was over in the legal sense, even if the emotional processing would take longer. My sessions with Celia started focusing on sleep hygiene and nightmare reduction techniques. She taught me how to journal before bed, writing down worries so my brain didn't need to process them while sleeping. We worked on progressive muscle relaxation and creating a bedtime routine that signaled safety to my nervous system. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the bad dreams becoming less frequent, maybe once a week instead of every night. Celia helped me understand that some of the nightmares were probably influenced by Dr. Huffman's leading questions during our sessions, planting images that my sleeping brain then elaborated on. Other nightmares were just normal stress responses to everything I'd been dealing with. Having that framework helped me trust my sleeping brain again, recognizing that dreams didn't mean I was losing my grip on reality. They were just my mind processing stress in its own weird way. The final piece of paperwork arrived from Nigel's office on a Thursday afternoon. Marcello's attorney had countersigned the no-contact agreement addendum, formalizing our decision to have zero direct communication, unless the police investigation required it. The document spelled out that we'd only interact through our lawyers, and any violation of the agreement could result in legal consequences. I read through the pages, seeing Marcello's signature at the bottom, his handwriting unchanged from when we used to leave each other notes on the bathroom mirror. Something about seeing that signature on a legal document brought unexpected closure. We were both choosing to protect ourselves from further manipulation, drawing clear boundaries that would keep us separate while the investigation continued. Whatever happened next, we wouldn't be pulled back into that confusing space where our realities blurred together. A few days later, the detective called while I was making dinner. He explained the co-working space security footage showed the camera angle was blocked by a large plant during the exact hours someone purchased that day pass. They'd checked with the front desk staff, but nobody remembered the customer who paid cash. The case would stay open, but without a clear way to identify who bought access that day, they were running into walls everywhere they turned. I thanked him for the update and hung up feeling oddly calm about the dead end. Some questions just wouldn't get answered, and I was learning to live with that uncertainty instead of needing every detail explained. That same afternoon, I called my mom and spent an hour walking her through everything. The impersonator attending therapy sessions with Marcello, Dr. Huffman's boundary violations, the spoofed messages and cloned accounts. She kept interrupting with horrified questions, asking how I was handling it all, whether I felt safe. I reassured her I was working with good lawyers and security specialists, that the intrusions had stopped. Then I told her we needed a code word for any future communication, something only the two of us would know. We settled on blueberry pancakes, the breakfast she made every Sunday when I was growing up. I made her promise to ignore any weird calls or messages claiming to be from me unless they included that phrase. Protecting my family from potential manipulation felt like drawing a circle of safety around the people I loved most. The next morning, an official letter arrived from Dr. Marsh's practice on thick letterhead paper. His written statement confirmed that I never attended any therapy sessions at his office, that all appointments under my name were with an unidentified woman who never provided photo identification. He apologized for his practice's role in the impersonation scheme and detailed the new verification policies they'd put in place. I filed the letter in my growing folder of documentation, even though I already knew I'd never set foot in his office. Having official proof felt important somehow. One more piece of evidence showing my version of reality was the accurate one against all the manufactured confusion. In my next therapy session, Celia helped me work through the tangled mess of betrayal and victimization. She pointed out that Marcello hurt me legitimately when he cheated during our relationship, that my anger about that was completely valid. But she also emphasized that the technological distortions afterward weren't his fault, that we were both targets of someone's elaborate scheme. Learning to hold both truths at the same time felt uncomfortable but necessary. I could acknowledge he betrayed my trust while also recognizing we were both manipulated by a third party. The distinction helped me separate the real pain from the manufactured chaos, processing each layer without letting them blur together. Over the following weeks, I started taking back my normal life piece by piece. I went to my Tuesday evening yoga class without scanning the parking lot first. I stopped at my regular coffee shop on Wednesday mornings and ordered my usual drink without checking if Marcello might walk through the door. I met friends for dinner on Friday nights and actually enjoyed the conversation instead of staying half alert for something weird to happen. I was more aware of my surroundings than before all this started, checking my phone more carefully and noticing who was around me. But I wasn't being hunted anymore, wasn't constantly investigating my own life. Things were starting to feel manageable again, like I could just exist without treating every day like a crime scene. A month after the licensing board received Nigel's formal complaint, they sent official notification that Dr. Huffman's case was under active monitoring. The letter explained she'd completed her initial supervision requirements and would continue regular check-ins with an assigned oversight therapist. They couldn't share specific details about her supervision plan because of confidentiality rules, but knowing there was institutional oversight gave me some confidence. Other clients would have protection I didn't have, someone watching to make sure she didn't violate boundaries again. The system wasn't perfect, and the process felt slow, but it was actually working the way it was supposed to. Around the same time, Jordan sent her final handover package with a detailed playbook for ongoing digital security. The document covered everything from password managers to hardware security keys to red flags that might indicate account compromise. She'd included a list of recommended tools with links to tutorials, plus a troubleshooting guide for common issues. Reading through her instructions, I realized she'd taught me how to spot the technical warning signs myself, instead of always needing expert help. I felt prepared to protect my own accounts going forward, equipped with knowledge instead of just hoping nothing bad would happen. The education she provided was worth more than just fixing my immediate problem. On a quiet Tuesday night 3 weeks later, I sat on my couch and checked my phone out of habit. No mysterious texts from Marcello, no spoofed messages appearing in my threads, no weird photos showing up in my library that I didn't remember taking, just normal messages from friends and a few work emails. I opened my notes app and wrote a new entry on purpose, typing out today's date, what I did at work, how I was feeling about everything. Then I printed it out and put it on my kitchen counter where I'd see it first thing tomorrow morning. Creating my own evidence trail intentionally felt like reclaiming the power someone tried to steal from me, taking back control over my own documentation and memory. 3 months after Dr. Ed Huffman's slip revealed this whole mess, I sat in Celia's office talking about future plans instead of past trauma. We discussed my upcoming promotion at work, the vacation I was planning with friends, whether I wanted to try dating again eventually. The conversation felt normal and forward-looking, focused on what I wanted to build instead of what had been taken from me. I told Celia I'd accepted that I might never know who impersonated me, or exactly why they targeted Marcello and me specifically. Maybe it was random, maybe it was personal, maybe it was just bad luck that we ended up in someone's criminal operation. But the intrusions had stopped completely. My digital security was stronger than ever, and I trusted my own sense of reality again. Some mysteries didn't need solving as long as you were safe on the other side of them, as long as you could move forward without constantly looking over your shoulder. That's where we'll wrap up for today. I'm really glad you were here, because it turns a simple story into something we share. Hopefully it brought a little light to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to keep that feeling going.